It's everybody's basic human right to be able to work the land. If you want to raise your kids by growing vegetables for your local community, what's wrong with that? Nothing. Land in the UK here is just locked up by big landowners. There's so many aristocrats. They own tons of land. They don't share it with anybody. They got it from way back in the day, usually based on injustice. The whole legacy of colonialism. Those people who bought land because they got money for losing their slaves when slavery was abolished, they got compensated for it today, right?
We have the skills and we need to just decentralize it. Everything seems to be in the hands of a few. So we become dependent on the few.
How can we recreate a reality that's better than any point in history?
Welcome to the Pollinators, where we spread some pollen on individuals and organizations that make people grow organically. Yes, people. Welcome to the Pollinators, where we spread some pollen on individuals or organizations that are organically growing people. I am very excited about the first episode. I'm so gassed. Big up to Moria. Big up to all Felix. Big up to everyone involved. It's been a long time in the making, but we've arrived. We landed. And my first guest, listen, this is a trip. We have the amazing, super energetic, party stopper, political activist, rebel, you name it, she got the titles for it. Jyoti Fernandes in the building, make some noise.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. So I've introduced your name. I should have asked that question, but I already jumped already, as usual, not done things in a formulaic way. Tell me a bit about what your passion, like what you're into.
Yeah. So my name's Jyoti Fernandes. I'm a farmer in Dorset. I have a small holding that's by the sea. Got 4 daughters, amazing daughters that are there with me. And we produce food for the local economy. We grow vegetables, we've got cows, we've got sheep, pigs, make cider, apple juice, all sorts of things. I moved away from doing that full time because my oldest daughter is now running the farm.
Great.
After being there for about 20 years, and started campaigning for land justice and land rights for small-scale farmers around the world. That's peasant farmers, indigenous people. It was a real struggle when we started our farm because I came from Louisiana. Originally I wasn't British, and, we're out in the middle of the British countryside. Land in the UK here is just locked up by big landowners. There's so many aristocrats. They own tons of land. They don't share it with anybody. They got it from way back in the day for winning military battles, whatever they did, to try and get that land, usually based on injustice. The whole legacy of colonialism, the legacy of slavery. Those people who bought land because they got, money for losing their slaves when slavery was abolished. And they still own it today. They got compensated for it today, right? And so it's really difficult if you want to start living on the land. I went into wanting to live on the land because when I had my kids, I wanted them to be able to have fresh food. Mm-hmm. I wanted them to be able to stay with me during the day. I didn't want to have to put them in daycare where I work some job on a computer somewhere else. I wanted them to be able to go and pick peas and be like, Mom, I've got peas, and get all excited about it, and be able to cook nice food for them. Want them to have fresh air, be out in the countryside. And that's something that's not that accessible
100%
to people.
Well, that's definitely been my experience with Mayport Garden. It's incredible that something which is such a basic right, a human right to have fresh, healthy food is so challenging. So let's take a little step back. You mentioned farmers, working with farmers. Is that Landworkers Alliance? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, the challenges of trying to get that land, learning all the skills to get it, having to fight a big battle for planning permission because, you can't build your own house in the countryside. And we couldn't afford a house in the countryside. No way. These £1 million properties by the sea are just snapped up like that with people who work in the city of London. You can't get anywhere to live. So we had to fight it out in courts, getting evicted from our land. We won the court case because actually it's everybody's basic human right to be able to work the land, right? If you want to raise your kids by growing vegetables for your local community, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? Nothing. So, all of that, learning all the skills, trying to get the money for the land, trying to fight the legal battles, we realize something's wrong. And, when something's wrong, you got to organize to change it. And so I was a part of trying to start the Landworkers Alliance, which is a union for farmers, growers, foresters, land-based workers, anybody who wants to earn their living by working the land. And we started that union to try and collectively organize to fight back for our rights, for better conditions, for being able to pay fair prices to farmers, for greater access to land, and more training and opportunity to be able to earn a living that way.
Wow, phenomenal amount of information, and just downloading all the kind of like the multiple battles you had just to kind of to have a healthy lifestyle for yourself and your family. Let's dive a little bit more into Landworkers Alliance, and can we talk specifically about maybe some of the cases and maybe some of the success stories that have come out of it? Because as activists, we get kind of caught up in the kind of like the battle, So I just want to know a little bit more about some of the cases, maybe just give us a few examples of some of the cases, some of the workers, and some of the success stories that the Union Landworkers Alliance has managed to kind of, support and report upon as well.
Yeah. I love telling the successes because I tell you, I've been campaigning on land justice for more than 30 years. And I had a lot of things go right, over that time. And it's always because when people get together and actually focus their mind and like work with their heart together in solidarity, things go right sometimes, that like the truth wins sometimes. Let me step back a minute and just explain that the Landworkers Alliance is part of Via Campesina. And Via Campesina is the most empowering organization, social movement I've ever encountered. We represent 200 million peasant farmers around the world. 200 million.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's awesome.
200 million peasant farmers and indigenous people who work the lands all across, continents where, up to 80% of the population, in Africa is engaged in small-scale farming and agriculture, all across Latin America, Asia, from the National Farmers Union of Canada, food sovereignty organizations and workers' unions all across the United States, in Central America, all the way down to Australia. We have organizations everywhere where people are working with the landscape around them to try and produce food for their local communities and defending their land rights and their right to be able to do that. And I mean, it's a success in the first place that amazing social movement came together, 100%. Right? To fight the power.
2 million as well. That's not a small number as well.
200
million.
And that is like serious power, right? And like, it's one of the most marginalized voices in the world of peasant farmers. People say peasant, like, why do you want to call yourself a peasant, right? They made peasant into a dirty word to colonize the spirit of the people who work the land. They wanted to take the land. They wanted to take the resources. So if you work with the land, they say you're dirty, you're ignorant, you're backwards, and all the negative associations with the word peasant.
Yeah.
But actually, it's one of the occupations that we should have the most pride in.
100%.
It's totally sustainable. You can regenerate the soil. You can, look after all the biodiversity, plants and animals and creatures that need to be sustained by that land being looked after without chemicals, without poisons. It's got a lot of pride in it and dignity in it because you're providing nutrition security for people's soul and their spirits if you work the land. And that spirit is what carries that union. Right? I go to the meetings and you meet people whose blood, sweat, and tears every day goes into producing food, churning it into these beautiful products and these meals that like nourishes people. People have a real celebration around food. I mean, every meeting, like we kick off with a massive party and a massive
and we're going to come to party later.
Everywhere in the world, you meet the peasant farmers, and it's the best food you ever taste, right? It's not the wealthy of this planet that eat the best. It's the
this is the whole thing. It's like, this is even me, you just describing that. I just got goosebumps, and I got so much joy because I've experienced that. And there's something about, I'm sure we've all, those who've been lucky enough to actually, when you go to someone's house who's prepared the food and grown it, the pride, and it's like this thing where, like, it's so often when I go to someone's place who's a farmer or grower and they've made a meal and they're like, no, you eat. And I'm like, what do you mean? You've been cooking telling the land for like how many months? And then you've been in the kitchen for like how many hours? And then you're like, I can't do it. I think it's inside.
I know. I had two grandmothers, Italian and Indian, like feeders. It's just like filling up your plate and you're just like, I can't eat anymore. And it's just like, feeders, you know?
Wow. So
It's like real pride, right? It's life force, food is. The land is a life force and food is a life force. So the people who defend it are amazing. So there's a lot of success stories over the years, like here in the UK, we formed to try and be different from the National Farmers Union, which is a union representing big industrial farmers and landowners, because we felt like the voice of small-scale farmers, people who wanted to grow food within their local communities and connect people to the land, was being like shut down by farmers wanting big global trade agreements and genetically modified seeds and to pour chemicals into the soil. And that method of farming that they use, it's responsible for 30% of climate emissions, right? We're losing our insects like rapidly across the planet. It's because of all these herbicides and pesticides being sprayed. In some places, we've lost up to 60% of insects. And if you haven't got the insects, you don't have the birds, you don't have everything higher up the food chain, That's collapse of our ecosystems if we continue down that path. Plus, you get people eating loads of ultra-processed junk food that's really bad for them.
unhealthy.
Really unhealthy. Yeah, really unhealthy. So, that kind of farming, that needs to shut down. The big factory farms full of animals that are treated so inhumanely. It's disgusting. It's disgusting, But then all around the world, there's farmers that are looking after the soil, saving their own seeds, using lots of diversity in their cropping systems, treating animals super well, recycling the nutrients in their system and making good, healthy food. Here in the UK, we wanted to look at the subsidy system that's supporting those big industrial farmers and
So subsidy, explain a little bit about what that is, because I think people might not know, and particularly for people that are just mainly consumers with food, they just think, okay, great, go to the supermarket and then the food is there. But they don't really understand the kind of the steps that are involved or the processes involved. And do you want to explain a little bit about that?
In general, we think, farmers are supporting the production of our food, which is a basic human right. We've all got the right to healthy, affordable food, well produced for an accessible price, in a place that's convenient for you to be able to get to it.
Yeah.
But, there's different ways of producing it. And some can be using loads of chemical fertilizers and big tractors and herbicides and pesticides. And other ways can be looking after the soil super well and, producing food that's really healthy and making sure that you can sell it to the community for an affordable price. And right now, the government wants to pay farmers to be able to produce food, and they should be supporting farmers to produce good food. Yeah. But the way it's operating now is that they're just giving it out to the big landowners. They're just paying big landowners by how much land they own, a flat rate payment on the acreage that they own to produce that food. And they're not saying how is that food being produced? Are animals being treated well? Are they spraying loads of chemicals? Are they looking after their workers well? All the things that farmers should be doing, they're not specifying that that's the way they should be farming. They're just giving them this money.
No accountability.
No accountability. No accountability. So you get farmers going around in their big fancy Land Rovers, like lording up the countryside and getting all this profit from taxpayers' money. And so we lobbied really hard on the Landworkers Alliance to do it differently. And to say that there should be support for farmers, there should be, legal protection for farmers trying to do the right thing, and there should be financial support for people producing food, but it's got to be good quality food. It's got to be nutritious. It's got to be accessible to the community. Animals need to be treated with high animal welfare standards. We've got to be looking after the soils. We've got to be supporting biodiversity, meaning all the birds and the wildflowers and, the insects that are on farms, making sure that they're looked after properly as part of that farming system. And then they can get the money. And there shouldn't be huge amounts of money going to big landowners. Yeah, so we reformed all of that by proposing something that got passed in the Agriculture Act. I went back and forth on the train to Westminster talking to politicians for about 2 years.
I was very curious because, what's involved in lobbying? Because obviously, from my perspective as being really grassroots, I keep hearing lobbying, I keep hearing papers, and I'm like, oh man, I ain't got time for that, And you are an incredible person that kind of straddles both of those worlds. Mm-hmm. The lobbying process, I hear it a lot, but what's involved? 2 years sounds like a long process. What do you do?
Yeah. So, lobbying, the majority of it, I got to say, is done by people in their suits.
Okay.
from agribusinesses, big corporations, big farmers unions hiring.
So people would have invested interest in this.
Vested interest to go and talk to politicians about what they think makes a good food system. And, I got engaged in lobbying, even though I was a farmer on the ground. I work with grassroots people all the time. That's what I do most of the time. But realize, there's a power imbalance there, because if you don't get to the table, then they win. And started to work on organizing people who are being excluded from these conversations about where our food system goes to be able to say, we need a place at the table. So we started out by having a big demonstration outside of DEFRA, which is the agriculture department for the UK. Went and set up tables on the sidewalk. I made this big feast full of food. We set up a farmer's market with people who produce really good quality food all outside the doors. We had these big placards that said a place at the table. Yeah. And then all the civil servants are looking out their windows at this office, obviously glazed over from looking behind computer screens. You got
hungry.
Massive pavlova, we had a stack of meringues with all the cream and fruit on it.
They had to come out. They had to come out.
Come talk to us.
And that's the most basic form of engagement. Food, man. Come on.
We'll tell you all about what makes a good food system, So we started out with that. The security guards are like, not let you through the door. But then slowly, we started to build those bridges. And, we started making little meetings with different ministers, with different people in the departments, inviting civil servants and people in government to come and visit our farms on the ground and see what it looks like when you actually have the community coming out and harvesting fresh vegetables straight out of a, peri-urban garden, or going out to the countryside and seeing the wildlife and breathing the fresh air and tasting food fresh from the farm. And they slowly started to come our way to understand there's a better way that we can do stuff. And some of the stuff they saw totally blew them away. People making a living out of 6 cows, if they, milk them and deliver it direct to doorstep to consumers who want healthy milk without hormones and all kinds of antibiotics in it, right? And then realizing, this person's making a living from 6 cows. We got people with 1,000 cow dairy herd that we're subsidizing with government.
Producing unto waste as well.
Operating at a loss because supermarket contracts don't give them a fair price for what they produce. And you take a step back and realize something's going a little wrong here. We did that for a while, and now I have a regular communication with the Minister of Agriculture, with the Secretary of State, with a lot of politicians who want to find out what they can do more about the food system. I used to be the crazy one in the room when I would walk into a farming conference. I was the only woman of color ever in the room. Yeah. It was a bunch of men in barber jackets, right? Even though the majority of the global food supply is
the global south, exactly.
It's the global south, and women. Yeah. Women farmers across the world, women of color, produce almost 80% of global food supply, right? And, by small farmers. And that's totally under-recognized. And getting into those conversations, I used to think, who is she in the corner of the room talking about climate change, talking about community food, talking about the fact that we live in a rich country and there are people who can't afford food.
Food banks. What is going on?
Banks. This is crazy. And now public consciousness is going up, and it needs to go up even more. And people need to speak out and say, we need something different. And now they pass the microphone to me and say, well, what's the solution then? Because things are changing, and things only change if people band together and they learn about what's going on. They develop a conscience around it, and they speak up and they speak out and they speak up collectively together. And I've noticed that shift over time in the impact of our lobbying, because now we get a little bit more voice in what's going on. It's not enough to completely change things, but we can keep mobilizing and we can keep trying to change things.
That's amazing. I really like the whole thing where you're talking about the lobbying process, because it's something that is always put towards me, and but I energetically, I'm just so I always admire your energy and the fact that you kind of have this ability to straddle both of those worlds. I think that was the first time I met you with Dee Woods, Bedison, and she was like, oh, Jyoti, in a festival, she's having a dance, but yet you're in Parliament as well. I was like, it's an incredible. So I suppose we're talking about, we're kind of talking about pollinators and the whole concept of nature. And we're kind of using this thing. You talked about the 80% of women being the growers across the global south as well. That's quite common as well. So we kind of see them as the margins or the edges. And we know in nature that is how the most innovative systems or the most diverse systems happen. So one thing for me that struck me is your fearlessness. So listen, this young lady, I'm telling you, like, you know, but one minute she's on the dance floor, next minute she's in the parliament. I'm just like, it's incredible. And I recently got to find out a little bit more about your background. So do you mind if we just, like, the first thing that intrigued me was your story about your mum. And do you mind if I just was like, oh, your mum was calling you and you were like, I don't even know where my mum is half the time. And then I was like, okay, that's fine. But then you told me your mum is what we call having a disabled. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah, she's totally blind. Yeah, she's totally blind, but she works all over the world. Yeah, last time I think when she called me, she was in Guyana. She's all over the place. Before that, she was in Rwanda. She organizes blind people to speak up for their rights all over the world. That's where I learned the importance of collective organizing because, my mom raised us totally blind, 5 children, and, fought to try and gain equality in society. She tried to work as a teacher and she was denied her teaching license because of being totally blind at one point in time and took that to court and then realized, that's how people claim their rights is by collectively organizing. So she started an organization, with the tagline that many people use, nothing without us, about us, that we need to be collectively organized as blind people to fight for disability rights. And so I kind of grew up her going around to little Louisiana town, organizing blind people and saying we got to fight for our rights. And it went side by side with the civil rights movement in America as well. I remember going to loads of demos, marches on Washington, conventions where it'd be a big hotel full of a couple thousand blind people, everybody going around with their canes, my mom sending me on missions all the time, but then, you realize the power of that because over my time I've seen, attitudes change, training centers that she started and her organization started all across the country, teaching empowerment that, what you believe in yourself, you can do, and then you transmit that to other people, you can achieve. And it just takes a lot of hard craft, a lot of hard belief, but also like a real relentless optimism that things can really change.
And I definitely see that within you. And that's why I wanted to kind of touch upon that because I didn't know that story. Like, I just see you as an incredible individual, but I didn't know that was part of one of your many influences that makes you who you are. Another one that was really interesting we touched upon was your story of your family, because when you first came, I don't think people realized how difficult it was for you when you first came to the UK and you actually didn't have a home, you didn't have a base. Do you mind if we kind of just touch upon?
Wow, yeah.
Okay. Because I think very often when people, I'll be honest, when people see you, they will just assume, okay, it's a very wealthy person, Asian background, because you're in parliament, you do that. They don't know. And I think sometimes we have a certain perception of people. Yeah. And so I was fascinated, not just because of your compassion and what you do, but also the story behind. And I think like the story of like, just maybe to touch on a little bit about your journey with your family, just to kind of just make you swept across it. But if you don't mind, if it's too emotional, whatever, that's fine. But I just think it's a fascinating, then you were foraging one point, you were living in a van or stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I first moved here, my husband at the time was not able to get any employment. And so he was on benefits, public benefits. I was like 23 and I was pregnant with my first child. So I wanted to move over here. But in order to get a visa to get into the country, we had to sign a thing saying that we would have no recourse to public benefits. I wasn't able to get any employment and I wanted to be with my daughter, raising her. And he only was able to get a job one day a week at a builder's merchants, got paid £17.50 for a day's work. So we were basically living on £17.50 a week. And we didn't want to try and be scroungers or anything like that. We wanted to be pretty independent. I wanted to raise my daughter close to nature. So we decided to move to a woodland and we built our own dwelling in the woods there.
She started a gag. I just like full of admiration.
Yeah, we built a little dwelling in the woods and raised her without electricity. This was pre-computer times and things, but I had a garden there, and I'd grow, beetroot and different vegetables. Did a lot of foraging in the woods, getting wild garlic and collecting herbs and things and adding that to the diet. And then with the money that we had, buying bulk foods. And I tried to buy organic when I could, but getting potatoes, rice, beans, just real basic things, and then adding to that from the wild foods and the things we grew. And that was a real lesson to me in that I could give my daughter everything she needed, my time, my love, warm shelter. We'd collect firewood and, burn that to stay warm and still live on a really low income. So, I went on to have my other 4 daughters, but we moved from there into a truck for a while, and we traveled from place to place, going to organic farms and working there and learning the skills in growing because I really enjoyed the growing, to think about the idea that we could become more self-sufficient and actually buy some land eventually. Then we moved to a community organic farm that was based on not using any fossil fuels. And that was a really great experience because, I raised all 4 of my daughters there. At that point, the last 2 were born in this community. Not ever having any recourse to public benefits, but earning our living from a land-based livelihood. So we would press apples there and make apple juice, and I'd take the apples to market and the apple juice to market, and I'd make herbal products and take them to market and sell them. And that was what we raised our kids on. But I think, they were raised with good values, and I think that was the most important thing to us. Now they're all grown. My oldest daughter's running the farm. She went on to Oxford University. My second daughter just graduated medical school in Manchester, so she's working as a junior doctor in Winchester. My third one's at Wimbledon Arts College. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the bit. Okay.
And my other one's just been visiting her up in Manchester studying politics and history. And, what's amazing is that all 4 of them look back to their background. And I think that focus on the healthy food, the fresh outdoors, the skills, and just holding genuine love, those are the values that really hold us together. And that's what peasant farmers do. And, I see that in every indigenous culture around the world that, it's not all about the money. It's about the access to the resources, to the land, the ability to provide your housing, the ability to support yourself that actually sustains us.
And I think to conclude, I think it's really interesting that we frame sustainability from a Western perspective, and it's all about the money that's coming into these projects and stuff. But actually, similar to, I'm not indigenous in terms of actually an indigenous person, but made product gardens for 9 years. We had no money as well to establish it. So our approach was quite unique as a way to, and it actually reflects the global South, the majority of people in the world that don't have no money. So all these things you're talking about, the foraging, like we did skipping, like going into dumpster diving, growing our own food, all these same things, using food as the basic to show people actually there is an alternative. It's really fascinating. What does the future hold for you? What would you like to see personally in terms of your journey, where you're going? Because I know you juggle quite a lot of plates, as we all do, the nature of the work.
Focusing on the international work, really. Okay. Well, focusing right in on land justice, because I want other people to have the opportunity that we managed to find a tiny, tiny little niche for. We had to warm ourselves around, fight lots of battles to be able to get access to that land, because that is not accessible to the majority of people. No way is that accessible in this country for people without much money to be able to live the way we lived. So I want to fight for everybody's opportunity to be able to do that and organize people to say that we want this and it's our basic human right, give us access to land.
Yeah.
Then thinking globally about, the chaotic future we're really facing and how we can collectively organize globally across the world as peasant farmers, as indigenous people and people who want land justice, to think about how the solutions to all the crises we face, whether it's social, community crises, crises in the right to food and food insecurity, or, the biodiversity and nature crisis that we're facing. The root of all of that is in access to land. So I'll be working globally with Via Campesina. I already do a lot of work with indigenous people in the Amazon. I've spent time going deep into the Amazon and working with the indigenous people there to protect their forests and territories, working with indigenous people in Africa who are also protecting their land and their food sovereignty. I'll be going to India next week to start working with the agroecology schools and the amazing farmers movements that won such tremendous battles to try and protect their land rights and their farming systems in recent years, and organizing people around the world to create a grassroots adaptation plan to the big transition we need to make. We need a big turning in the whole way this world operates, and I believe it needs to be rooted in access to land. So we need to think about how we scale up all this grassroots work that's going on by farmers' movements around the world, network them, find all the schools that are teaching what we call agroecology, that's farming that works with nature, how we start to look at the way we're going to resettle the huge climate migration problem there is. We're on track for 1.6 billion climate refugees in the next 10 years. 1.6 billion.
It's crazy.
People will need to leave their countries because they're going to be too hot to produce any food and to live in. How do we think about resettling people actively, getting access to those resources? Like the Ministry of Defense knows that there's these 1.6 billion climate refugees being anticipated, right?
Well, they've already implemented with the Rwanda. Yeah. They're kind of, they're kind of all out. They're
ready to just keep the boats out, right? Create Fortress Europe.
Yeah.
But what we should be doing is thinking ahead. Where can people be resettled? Where can we start looking after the soils and planting trees, getting people houses built, and thinking about how they work together to try and make this big transition happen? Because, if you can move the planet back towards producing our food in a way that works in harmony with the land, getting people the skills to be able to build their own homes, generate their own electricity, create their own schools and knowledge bases that are based on indigenous knowledge systems, and taking the knowledge from the past, the good things, and bringing them into the future. How can we recreate a reality that's better than any point in history?
And it's really beautiful because, Mayport About Us, we have a group of young people for our program called Hip Hop Garden, and actually they built a straw bale. They built a classroom, natural classroom as well. And the conversation that came out of that was actually them being in a place where they've been treated really badly. Like they don't have a status as refugees. They've been treated like the worst in society, taken advantage of financially, money, spiritually, everything like that. And so the conversation emerged where we can build your own, you can build your own properties, you can build your own house, you can build your own city if you wanted to, if you have the time. So when they did that, exactly what you said, I definitely echo the sentiments about what you're saying. We have the skills and we need to just decentralize it. Everything seems to be in the hands of a few. So we become dependent on the few.
Yeah.
And then actually what we're doing, we're saying to people, I love working with the refugees because they're so innovative in terms of how they think about things and how they create
survivors.
100%.
Yeah.
And one of my videos, I'm saying, if you can come from 10 billion countries or whatever it is, that's exaggeration. But if you can come from 7 different countries and make that journey to the UK, you can achieve anything here as well. Yeah. And they've demonstrated that time and time again. Mm-hmm. And we need to see them as a valuable resource and put them into value, contributing to society rather than actually just kicking them out, sending them to Rwanda.
No, it's so crazy. Why are we investing 25 million in robotics when some of the best agricultural workers in the world are wanting to come to this country and put in a lot of work to make it a place where people are fed well, and nutritious food. We need to value people that come here as workers, particularly in the food system. There's a lot of exploitation within the food system of workers, in that people that are treated terribly, like they're just a pair of arms, right? And we've got to iron out, to stamp out that exploitation and value those as the most important people that are providing for our right to food and welcome them, and all of that kind of revolution and the way we think about society is something where we really, really value the people with the work. The land is at the heart of it.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. We kind of talked quite broadly about some of the campaigns, but can we highlight 1 or 2 campaigns with a bit more detail to show something that's tangible so the audience can kind of dig their teeth into a little bit. Teeth is maybe not I know you like the meat, but maybe that's not the first. But can get their hands immersed into. There you go.
So there was one campaign I was involved in, working together in solidarity with farmers in India, where the UK government had decided, because they've got this conceptual framework for agriculture that says we should remove people from the land and put them into different sectors of the economy, right? They came up with this project called Vision 2020, and it was developed by a consultancy firm, an American consultancy firm that's all about trying to integrate everybody into the big global corporate economy. And they think that's the way forward for progress, right? And this program would have dispossessed 20 million farmers from the land.
Wow.
Because they were trying to say that the population of this state in India was Andhra Pradesh, was 70% engaged in agriculture, and they wanted to reduce that down to 30% of the population in agriculture. So that 40% left 20 million people without a livelihood if they started to transition the land use within that state over to large-scale farming that was produced industrially to ship, goods across the planet.
Yeah.
Where, these farmers were actually doing farming systems where they're producing all these crops for their own food security, for their own community. In India, the small-scale dairy industry, right, got the largest production of dairy in the world. 90 million farmers, 75 million of them women, who milk cows by hand primarily. The average size of the herd is 3 cows. Milk them by hand, put the milk into these churns, carry them on their head to these cooperative collection points where they pour the milk through sieves. They have it hooked up to the women's bank account. They directly get the money for the milk, and then that's redistributed by people who then take that, make it into cheese for cooking nice curries or yogurts. To make that wonderful paneer, and then sell it, it might be in churns, by going around villages by bicycle, on little carts at the markets, whatever it is, very decentralized, people-based, mass-scale production, right? But the Indian government and the UK government were going to try and phase this out through a development program. So some people I know went to the villages and asked people, what is it that you want? What future for agriculture do you actually want? And they held these citizens' juries. And unanimously, the village council said, we want the form of agriculture that's based on our own traditional seeds, on our own livestock systems, on our own traditional cuisine, and distributed in a way that supports people's livelihoods in a fair way, right? Listen to our knowledge, not some American consultancy firm, right? And so we organized a protest in solidarity with these farmers where a lot of the farmers came over, all women in their saris with these beautiful seeds and their seed pots all decorated so beautifully because it's such a part of their culture as well. They made this big mandala in the parliament on the floor of the parliamentary rooms and invited all the people from the agriculture department and from the development department to come and find out what they wanted for a future for agriculture. Now, of course, nobody came. So they said, well, in India, we use nonviolent direct action if people don't listen to us.
Now, interesting.
And they went and blockaded the doors of the development department and sat in front of them very gracefully, with a lot of us in solidarity as well, standing there with them. They locked arms. They refused to move to let anybody in and out of the building until somebody agreed to meet with them. And they had their own videography team as well. And they finally got invited to go and meet with the head of the Department for International Development at the time, and recorded them saying, okay, we hear what you're saying, when they were like, about all the stuff that was happening to them.
The voices.
And really made their voice heard. And then it got backed up by a media campaign. It got backed up because of this bravery that they showed in trying to make their voices heard. And eventually that media campaign worked. The campaign that we were backing up worked, and the program got canceled. And they were able to then go back to India and support, the growth of the form of agriculture that was based on their own natural farming methods. And now that, over the last 20 years, has grown into a huge movement called the natural farming movement. Wow. That's actually supported by the state government in that state. And it was led by women and, women teaching other women through, this multiplication of effort. And it's a real proper grassroots revolution in changing what the future of that whole agriculture in that state looks like.
That is beautiful. Such a beautiful story. And I know there's so much more. And I feel like we're going to do part 2, 3, 4, 5, possibly, because there's so much to cover as well. But first of all, thank you for your time. I know you've got a really busy schedule, and it's been really amazing to have you here.
It's a joy being here with you.
I know. And I just feel there's so much.
Doing the good work.
I mean, and you are as well. And what's been really amazing for me is this whole thing about the connections without us not connecting. There's so much synergy in terms of like even the way in which the campaigns are working, like how we've worked using videography, using food, using, like non-direct protest as well. Like, like it's such an amazing, there's something in the DNA of us who are connected to the land and are, working with the land and growing. There's this kind of DNA of activism as well that I'm seeing time and time again. So it's brilliant to hear these stories as well. People are going to watch this. They're going to be inspired. They're going to be like really excited. How do they become more involved in supporting your work or contacting you as well?
Yeah.
Give them the information if possible, please.
So if you want to get involved in changing the food system here in the UK and work in solidarity globally with the Via Campesina, you can join the Landworkers Alliance. You can join if you're a producer member, but you can also join if you're a supporter member. You can join if you care about food justice and a better food system and get involved in all of our mobilizations and direct actions, sign our petitions and donate financially as well. And if you're interested in actually gaining the skills to start working the land, wherever you are and wherever you come from, you are welcome. And, we have the Land Skills Fair, which is a festival, and it's so much fun. And people come together that want to connect with the land or with each other and build a real social movement around a better food system and land justice. And on my farm as well, I'm going to be welcoming people to be able to come, people from...
Please don't announce that because we want to keep that to ourselves. Okay, you don't know what.
But, we'll be creating a land skills hub, and there's, members all across the country that do welcome engagement from the community to come and get involved and see what we're doing on farms and start to learn the skills because, it's an amazing career. It's a hard one now in the system that we're working in to try and earn a livelihood from the land, but it's also incredibly rewarding. And we want to try and work together to make that easier, but also share the skills for people to be able to grow their own food, create their own housing, and live outside of the global capitalist system.
Live the way we're supposed to do as humans, as well.
Yeah.
What's the website? Is there a website for like a business?
Oh, yeah, it's the Landworkers Alliance.
Yeah, Landworkers Alliance. Okay, great.
Yeah. Look out the Landworkers Alliance and La Via Campesina.
Great, brilliant. Thank you once again. It's been a joy, Jyoti. I don't know what. Jyoti. Thank you so much for your time, your presence, and I'm looking forward to part 2 as well. All right.